Connecting to chat, are we? Okay, seems like we're connected to the chat now. Maybe. Don't know if anyone's here yet. Children playing outside, going, woo, woo. Hi. How are you? Oh, thank you. Can you even see it? Or you just know what it is? It's the angel shirt, and I've got this amethyst here. Hello. How are you guys? Itchy. How's everybody doing? Doing okay. Doing okay. Feel kind of off today, but maybe it's because it's all like kind of rainy here. Well, it's not rainy. It's just gray. I don't know. Everybody gets itchy sometimes. Oh, nice. Good. It's okay. Yeah. Maybe reading will help, though. Yeah. Sorry, it's that stupid Twitch that's just really bothering me. Why is it... So, I see that I have a skipped frame thing. Why is that happening when I don't have any graphics appearing on the screen? I don't understand. I don't understand why it happens when it's just me. Sorry, that was my contact bothering me. Or it's just me when I'm filming that it bothers me. Like, that it does that. But not, like, when I'm streaming games or anything like that. You would imagine that it would happen more when I'm streaming games or something and it's just, like, running at higher power and I don't know. Maybe it is a Sunday thing. Maybe my internet decides to be crappy on Sundays. I don't know. Yeah, me too. We can launch in if you guys want to get started. Let me see where I imagine we'll end off today. Okay. Alright, so I have... Where did the little thingy that I was using? It was like a bookmark go. Alright, well, it's not here anymore from what I can see, but I do have something else I can use, so I'll just use that if I need it. But anyway. Oh, thank you. I really was trying to go for something, like, magical looking. I don't know if I accomplished that. But I tried. So, E for effort, at least. I'm not used to doing, like, darker looks. As you guys know, my style is usually pretty pastel. So, thank you. So it was cool to do this, kind of, one. I don't know. I think it's like a little uneven. I think that there's less yellow. I forget which side is which. Less yellow on this one than on this one. I feel like I did some more. Whatever. It is what it is. I'm glad that you guys like it. So, alright. We are on chapter 7, in which a scarecrow prevents Sophie from leaving the castle. Yeah, see, I noticed as I was saying it, it's like, why am I pointing things out? Let me not do that. But anyway. Okay. Only a particularly bad attack of aches and pains prevented Sophie from setting out for market shipping that evening, but the drizzle in Port Haven had gotten to her bones. She lay in her cubbyhole and ached and worried about Martha. It might not be bad. It might not be so bad, she thought. She only had to tell Martha that the suitor she was not sure about was none other than Wizard Howl. Wizard Howl. That would scare Martha off. And she would tell Martha that the way to scare Howl off was to announce that she was in love with him, and then perhaps to threaten him with ants. Sophie was still creaking when she got up the next morning. Curse the Witch of the Waste, she muttered to her stick as she got it out, ready to leave. She could hear Howl singing in the bathroom as if he had never had a tantrum in his life. She tiptoed to the door as fast as she could hobble. Howl, of course, came out of the bathroom before she reached it. Sophie looked at him sourly. He was all spruce and dashing, scented gently with apple blossom. The sunlight from the window dazzled off his gray and scarlet suit and made a faintly pink halo of his hair. I think my hair looks rather good this color, he said. Do you indeed? Grumped Sophie. It goes with this suit, said Howl. You have quite a touch with your needle, don't you? You've given the suit more style somehow. Ha! Said Sophie. Howl stopped with his hand on the knob above the door. Aches and pains troubling you, he said. Or has something annoyed you? Annoyed? Said Sophie. Why should I be annoyed? Someone only filled the castle with rotten aspic, and deafened everyone in Port Haven, and scared Calcifer to a cinder, and broke a few hundred hearts. Why should that annoy me? Howl laughed. I apologize, he said, turning the knob to red down. The king wants to see me today. I shall probably be kicking my heels in the palace until evening, but I can do something for your rheumatism when I get back. Don't forget to tell Michael I left that spell for him on the bench. He smiled sunnily at Sophie and stepped out among the spires of Kingsbury. And you think that makes it all right? Sophie growled as the door shut. But the smile had mollified her. If that smile works on me, then it's no wonder poor Martha doesn't know her own mind, she muttered. I need another log before you go, Calcifer reminded her. Sophie hobbled to drop another log onto the grate. Then she set off to the door again. But here... Hold on. Do I have a page? Yeah, I did have a page stuck together. But here Michael came running down the downstairs and snatched the remains of a loaf off the bench as he ran to the door. You don't mind, do you? He said in an agitated way. I'll bring a fresh loaf when I come back. I've got something very urgent to see to today, but I'll be back by evening. If the sea captain calls for his wind spell, it's on the end of the bench, clearly labeled. He turned the doorknob green downward and jumped out into the windy hillside, loaf clutched to his stomach. See you! He shouted as the castle trundled away past him and the door slammed. Botheration! Said Sophie. Calcifer, how does a person open the door when there's no one outside in the How does a person open the door when there's no one inside the castle? I'll open it for you. Or Michael. Hal does it himself, said Calcifer. So no one would be locked out when Sophie left. She was not at all sure she would be coming back, but she did not intend to tell Calcifer. She gave Michael time to get well on the way to wherever he was going and set off for the door again. This time Calcifer stopped her. If you're going to be away long, he said, you might leave some logs where I can reach them. Can you pick up logs? Sophie asked, intrigued in spite of her impatience. For answer, Calcifer stretched out a blue arm-shaped flame divided into green finger-like flames at the end. It was not very long, nor did it look strong. See? I can almost reach the hearth, he said proudly. Sophie stacked a pile of logs in front of the grate so that Calcifer could at least reach the top one. "You're not to burn them until you've got them in the grate," she warned him. And she set off for the door yet again. This time somebody knocked on it before she got there. It was one of those days, Sophie thought. It must be the sea captain. She put her hand to turn the knob blue down. "No, it's the castle door," Calcifer said. "But I'm not sure." Then it was Michael back for some reason. Sophie thought as she opened the door. Then it was Michael back for some reason, Sophie thought as she opened the door. A turnip face leered at her. She smelled mildew. Against the wide blue sky, a ragged arm ending in the stump of a stick wheeled round and tried to paw at her. It was a scarecrow. It was only made of sticks and rags, but it was alive, and it was trying to come in. "Calcifer!" Sophie screamed. "Make the castle go faster!" The stone blocks round the doorway crunched and grated. The green-brown moorland was suddenly rushing past. The scarecrow's stick arm thumped on the door, and then went scraping along the wall of the castle as the castle left it behind. It wheeled its other arm round and seemed to try to clutch at the stonework. It meant to get into the castle if it could. Sophie slammed the door shut. This, she thought, just showed how stupid it was for an eldest child to try to seek her fortune. This was the scarecrow she had propped in the hedge on her way to the castle. She had made jokes to it. Now, as if her jokes had brought it to evil life, it had followed her all the way here and tried to paw at her face. She ran to the window to see if the thing was still trying to get into the castle. Of course, all she could see was a sunny day in Porthaven, with a dozen sails going up a dozen masts beyond the roofs, opposite, and a cloud of seagulls circling in the blue sky. "That's the difficulty of being in several places at once," Sophie said to the human skull on the bench. Then, all at once, she discovered the real drawback to being an old woman. Her heart gave a leap and a little stutter, and then seemed to be trying to bang its way out of her chest. It hurt. She shook all over and her knees trembled. She rather thought she might be dying. It was all she could do to get to the chair by the hearth. She sat there panting, clutching her chest. It's interesting, they misspelled the word there here. They used the possessive there. I'm focusing on the wrong things, clearly, but I'm an English major, so. But it's like, how did the editors miss this? I don't know. Is something the matter? Calcifer asked. "Yes. My heart. There was a scarecrow at the door," Sophie gasped. What has a scarecrow to do with your heart?" Calcifer asked. "It was trying to get in here. It gave me a terrible fright. And my heart—" "But you wouldn't understand, you silly young demon," Sophie panted. "You haven't got a heart." "Yes, I have," Calcifer said as proudly as he had revealed his arm. "Down in the glowing part under the logs. And don't call me young. I'm a good million years older than you are. Can I reduce the speed of the castle now?" "Only if the scarecrow's gone," said Sophie. "Has it?" "I can't tell," said Calcifer. "It's not flesh and blood, you see. I told you I couldn't really see outside." Sophie got up and dragged herself to the door again, feeling ill. She opened it slowly and cautiously. Green steepness, rocks, and purple slopes whirled past, making her feel dizzy. But she took a grip on the doorframe and leaned out to look along the wall to the moorland they were leaving behind. The scarecrow was about 50 yards to the rear. It was hopping from clump to heather clump with a sinister sort of valiance, holding its fluttering stick arms at an angle to balance it on the hillside. As Sophie watched, the castle left it further behind. It was slow, but it was still following. She shut the door. "It's still there," she said, "hopping after us. Go faster!" "But that upsets all my calculations," Calcifer explained. "I was aiming to circle the hills and get back to where Michael left us in time to pick him up this evening." "Then go twice as fast and circle the hills twice, as long as you leave that horrible thing behind," said Sophie. "What a fuss," Calcifer grumbled. But he increased the castle's speed. Sophie could actually, for the first time, feel its rumbling around her as she sat huddled in her chair, wondering if she was dying. She did not want to die yet, before she had talked to Martha. As the day went on, everything in the castle began to jiggle with its speed. Bottles chinked. The skull clattered on the bench. Sophie could hear things falling off of the shelf in the bathroom and splashing into the bath where Hal's blue and silver suit was still soaking. She began to feel a little better. She dragged herself to the door again and looked out, with her hair flying in the wind. The ground was streaking past underneath. The hills seemed to be spinning slowly as the castle sped across them. The grinding and rumbling nearly deafened her, and smoke was puffing out behind in blasts. But the scarecrow was a tiny black dot on a distant slope by then. Next time she looked, it was out of sight entirely. Good, then I shall stop for the night, said Calcifer. That was quite a strain. The rumbling died away. Things stopped jiggling. Calcifer went to sleep in the way fires do, sinking among the logs until they were rosy cylinders plated with white ash, with only a hint of blue and green deep underneath. Sophie felt quite spry again by then. She went and fished 6 packets and a bottle of out of the slimy water in the bath. The packets were soaked. She did not dare leave them that way after yesterday, so she laid them on the floor and very cautiously sprinkled them with the stuff labeled drying powder. They were dry almost instantly. Drying power, rather. They were dry almost instantly. This was encouraging. Sophie let the water out of the bath and tried the power on Hal's suit. That dried too. It was still stained green and rather smaller than it had been, but it cheered Sophie up to find that she could put at least something right. She felt cheerful enough to busy herself getting supper. She bundled everything on the bench into a heap round the skull at one end and began chopping onions. At least your eyes don't water, my friend, she told the skull. Count your blessings. The door sprang open. Sophie nearly cut herself in her fright, thinking it was the Scarecrow again, but it was Michael. He burst jubilantly in. He dumped a loaf, a pie, and a pink and white striped box on top of the onions. Then he seized Sophie around her skinny waist and danced her around the room. It's all right! It's all right! He shouted joyfully. Sophie hopped and stumbled to keep out of the way of Michael's boots. Steady, steady, she gasped, giddily trying to hold the knife where it would not cut either of them. What is all right? Letty loves me! Michael shouted, dancing her almost into the bathroom and then almost into the hearth. She's never even seen Hal. It was all a mistake. He spun them both round in the middle of the room. What? He's after the other sister? Will you let me go before this knife cuts one of us? Sophie squawked, and perhaps explain a little. Meow! Michael shouted. He whirled Sophie to the chair and dumped her into it, where she sat gasping. Last night I wish you'd dye his hair blue, he said. I know mine now. When Hal said Letty had her, I even thought of dyeing him blue myself. You can see the way he talks. I knew he was going to drop this girl, just like all the others. As soon as he... Oh, right. It was Letty that he was after, but it's Martha who's currently posing as Letty. I forgot. So they're both after Letty, who's actually Martha. And neither of them know that Sophie is Sophie. Whoa. You can see the way he talks. You can see the way he talks. I knew he was going to drop this girl, just like all the others, as soon as he'd got her to love him. And when I thought it was my Letty, Anyway, you know he said there was another fellow, and I thought that was me, so I tore down to Market Chipping today, and it was all right. Hal must be after some other girl with the same name. Letty's never even seen him. Let's get this straight, Sophie said dizzily. We are talking about the Letty Hatter who works at Cesari's pastry shop, are we? Of course we are, Michael said jubilantly. I've loved her ever since she started working there, and I almost couldn't believe it when she said she loved me. She has hundreds of admirers. I wouldn't have been surprised if Hal was one of them. I'm so relieved. I got you a cake from Cesari's to celebrate. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. Ah, so he must have been after... I'm getting very confused. He's after the real Letty, who's currently posing as Martha. Probably then. It makes sense that he would see through a spell. Because he's a wizard. That's probably what's going on. Wow, what a tangled web. Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay, hold on, what's it called? I got you a cake from Cesari's to celebrate. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. He thrust the pink and white box at Sophie. Onion fell off it into her lap. How old are you, my child? Sophie asked. 15 last May Day, said Michael. Calcifer sent fireworks up from the castle. Didn't you, Calcifer? Oh, he's asleep. You're probably thinking I'm too young to be engaged. I've still got 3 years of my apprenticeship to run, and Letty's got even longer, but we promised one another, and we don't mind waiting. Then Michael was about the right age for Martha, Sophie thought. And she knew by now he was a nice, steady lad with a career as a wizard ahead of him, bless Martha's heart. When she thought back to that bewildering May Day, she realized that Michael had been one of that shouting group. Blah. When she thought back to that bewildering May Day, she realized that Michael had been one of that shouting group leaning on the counter in front of Martha, but Hal had been outside in Market Square. "Are you sure Letty was telling the truth about Hal?" she asked anxiously. "Positive," said Michael. "I know when she's lying. She stops twiddling her thumbs." "She does too," said Sophie, chuckling. "How do you know?" Michael asked in surprise. "Because she's my sister's granddaughter," said Sophie. "And as a small girl, she was not always terribly truthful. But she's quite young and, well, suppose she changes as she grows. She, may not look quite the same in a year or so." "Neither will I," said Michael. "People our age change all the time. It won't worry us. She'll still be Letty." In a matter of speaking, Sophie thought. "But suppose she was telling the truth," she went on anxiously, "and she just knew Hal under a false name." "Don't worry, I thought of that," said Michael. "I described Hal. You must admit he's pretty recognizable. And she really hadn't seen him or his wretched guitar. I didn't even have to tell her he doesn't know how to play the thing. She never set eyes on him, and she twiddled her thumbs. All the time. She said she hadn't." "That's a relief," Sophie said, lying stiffly back in her chair. And it certainly was a relief about Martha. But it was not much of a relief, because Sophie was positive that the only other Letty Hatter in the district was the real one. If there had been another, someone would have come into the hat shop and gossiped about it. It sounded like strong-minded Letty not giving in to Hal. What worried Sophie was that Letty had told Hal her real name. She might not be sure about him, but she liked him enough to trust him with an important secret like that. "Don't look so anxious," Michael laughed, leaning on the back of the chair. "Have a look at the cake I brought you." As Sophie started opening the box, it dawned on her that Michael had gone from seeing her as a natural disaster to actually liking her. She was so pleased and grateful that she decided to tell Michael the whole truth about Letty and Martha, and herself too. It was only fair to let him know the sort of family he meant to marry into. The box came open. It was Cesari's most luscious cake, covered in cream and cherries and little curls of chocolate. "Oh," said Sophie. The square knob over the door clicked round to red blob down of its own accord, and Hal came in. "What a marvelous cake! My favorite kind," he said. "Where did you get it?" I called in at Cesari's," Michael said in a sheepish, self-conscious way. Sophie looked up at Hal. Something was always going to interrupt her when she decided to say she was under a spell. Even a wizard, it seemed. "It looks worth the walk," Hal said, inspecting the cake. "I've heard Cesari's is better than any of the cake shops in Kingsbury. Stupid of me never to have been in the place. And is that a pie I see on the bench?" He went over to look. "Pie and a bed of raw onions. Human skull looking put upon." He picked up the skull and knocked an onion ring out of its eye socket. "I see Sophie has been busy again. Couldn't you have restrained her, my friend?" The skull yattered its teeth at him. Hal looked startled and put it down rather hastily. "Oh, that's weird. I didn't know the skull was alive." "I don't think Sophie knew that the skull was alive." "Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking, too, so I don't know that Letty actually told, Hal anything, or that he just knew." "Something the matter?" Michael asked. He seemed to know the signs. "There is," said Hal. "I shall have to find someone to blacken my name to the king." "Was there something wrong with the wagon spell?" said Michael. "No, it worked perfectly. That's the trouble," Hal said, restlessly twiddling an onion ring on one finger. The king's trying to pin me down to do something else now. Calcifer, if we're not very careful, he's going to appoint me royal magician." Calcifer did not answer. Hal rode back to the fireside and realized Calcifer was asleep. "Wake him up, Michael," he said. "I need to consult him." Michael threw 2 logs on Calcifer and called him. Nothing happened, apart from a thin spire of smoke. "Calcifer!" Hal shouted. That did no good either. Hal gave Michael a mystified look and picked up the poker, which was something Sophie had never seen him do before. "Sorry, Calcifer," he said, jabbing under the unburned logs. "Wake up!" One thick black cloud of smoke rolled up and stopped. "Go away," Calcifer grunted. "I'm tired." At this, Hal looked thoroughly alarmed. "What's wrong with him? I've never known him like this before." "I think it was the Scarecrow," Sophie said. Hal swiveled around on his knees and leveled his glass marble eyes at her. "What have you done now?" He went on staring while Sophie explained. A scarecrow, he said. Calcifer agreed to speed up the castle because of a scarecrow? Dear Sophie, do please tell me how you bully a fire demon into being that obliging. I'd dearly love to know. I didn't bully him, said Sophie. It gave me a turn, and he was sorry for me. It gave her a turn, and Calcifer was sorry for her, Hal repeated. My good Sophie, Calcifer is never sorry for anyone. Anyway, I hope you enjoy raw onions and cold pie for your supper, because you've almost put Calcifer out. There's the cake, Michael said. There's the cake, Michael said, trying to make peace. The food did seem to improve Hal's temper, although he kept casting anxious looks at the unburning logs in the hearth all the time that they were eating. The pie was good cold, and the onions were quite tasty when Sophie had soaked them in vinegar. The cake was superb. While they were eating it, Michael risked asking Hal what the king had wanted. Nothing definite yet, Hal said gloomily, but he was sounding me out about his brother, quite ominously. Apparently, they had a good old argument before Prince Justin stormed off, and people are talking. The king obviously wanted me to volunteer to look for his brother, and like a fool, I went and said I didn't think Wizard Suleiman was dead, and that made matters worse. Why do you want to slither out of looking for the prince? Sophie demanded. Don't you think you can find him? Rude as well as a bully, aren't you? Hal said. He had still not forgiven her about Calcifer. I want to get out of it because I know I can find him, if you must know. Justin was great buddies with Suleiman, and the argument was because he told the king he was going to look for him. He didn't think the king should have sent Suleiman to the Waste in the first place. Now, even you must know that there is a certain lady in the Waste who is very bad news. She promised to fry me alive last year, and she sent a curse out after me I've only avoided so far because I had the sense to give her a false name. Sophie was almost awed. You mean you jilted the Witch of the Waste? Hal cut himself another lump of cake, looking sad and honorable. That is not the way to put it. I admit I thought I was fond of her for a time. She is in some ways a very sad lady, very unloved. Every man in Ingary is scared stiff of her. You ought to know how that feels, Sophie dear. Sophie's mouth opened in utter indignation. Michael said quickly, Do you think we should move the castle? That's why you invented it, wasn't it? That depends on Calcifer. Hal looked over his shoulder at the barely smoking logs again. I must say, if I think of the king and the witch both after me, I get a craving for planting the castle on a nice frowning rock 1,000 miles away. Michael obviously wished he had not spoken. Sophie could see he was thinking that 1,000 miles was a terribly long way from Martha. But what happens to your Letty Hatter? She said. But what happens to your Letty Hatter? She said to Hal. If you up and move. Yeah, maybe she is able to bring things to life. I expect that will be all over by then, Hal said absently, but if I could only think of a way to get the king off my back. I know! He lifted his fork with a melting hunk of cream and cake on it and pointed it at Sophie. You can blacken my name to the king. You can pretend to be my old mother and plead for your blue-eyed boy. He gave Sophie the smile which had no doubt charmed the Witch of the Waste, and possibly Letty too, firing it along the fork, across the cream, straight into Sophie's eyes, dazzlingly. If you can bully Calcifer, the king should give you no trouble at all. Sophie stared through the dazzle and said nothing. This, she thought, was where she slithered out. She was leaving. It was too bad about Calcifer's contract. She had had enough of Hal. First green slime, then glaring at her for something Calcifer had done quite freely, and now this! Tomorrow she would slip off to upper folding and tell Letty all about it. We have Chapter 8, in which Sophie leaves the castle in several directions at once. Interesting. To Sophie's relief, Calcifer blazed up bright and cheerful next morning. If she had not had enough of Hal, she would have been almost touched by how glad Hal was to see Calcifer. I thought she'd done for you, you old ball of gas. That is an odd sentence, but, you know, like British lingo, I think. It's interesting, because sometimes if a book is, like, British in origin, the text, if you're trying to read it out loud, may not come as instinctively as, like, something of American origin if you're American. Probably the same goes if you're British and reading something of American origin, and the like. So sometimes it can be a little stumbly. "I thought you'd done for you, you old ball of gas," Hal said, kneeling at the hearth with his sleeves trailing in the ash. "I was only tired," Calcifer said. "There was some kind of drag on the castle. I'd never taken it that fast before." "Well, don't let her make you do it again," said Hal. He stood up, gracefully brushing ash off his gray and scarlet suit. "Make a start on that spell today, Michael. And if anyone comes from the king, I'm away on urgent private business until tomorrow. I'm going to see Letty, but you needn't tell him that." He picked up his guitar and opened the door, with the knob green down, onto the wide, cloudy hills. The Scarecrow was there again. When Hal opened the door, it pitched sideways across him and its turn-up face in his chest. Across him with its turned-up face in his chest. Guitar uttered an awful twing. Sophie gave a faint squawk of terror and hung onto the chair. One of the Scarecrow's stick arms was scraping stiffly around to get a purchase on the door. From the way Hal's feet were braced, it was clear he was being shoved quite hard. There was no doubt that the thing was determined to get into the castle. Calcifer's blue face leaned out of the grate. Michael stood stock still beyond. "There really is a Scarecrow," they both said. "Oh, is there? Do tell!" Hal panted. He got one foot up against the doorframe and heaved. The Scarecrow flew lumpishly away backward to land with a light rustle in the heather some yards off. It sprang up instantly and came hopping toward the castle again. Hal hurriedly laid the guitar on the doorstep and jumped down to meet it. "No, you don't, my friend," he said with one hand out. "Go back where you came from." He walked forward slowly, still with his hand out. The Scarecrow retreated a little, hopping slowly and warily backward. When Hal stopped, the Scarecrow stopped too, with its one leg planted in the heather and its ragged arms tilting this way and that like a person sparring for an opening. The rags fluttering on its arms seemed a mad imitation of Hal's sleeves. "So you won't go?" Hal said, and the turnip head slowly moved from side to side. "No." "I'm afraid you'll have to," Hal said. "You scare Sophie, and there's no knowing what she'll do when she's scared. Come to think of it, you scare me, too." Hal's arms moved heavily, as if he was lifting a large weight, until they were raised high above his head. He shouted out a strange word, which was half hidden in a crack of sudden thunder, and the Scarecrow went soaring away. Up and backward it went, rags fluttering, arms wheeling in protest, up and out, and on, until it was a soaring speck in the sky, then a vanishing point in the clouds, and then not to be seen at all. Hal lowered his arms and came back to the doorway, mopping his face on the back of his hand. "I take back my hard words, Sophie," he said, panting. "That thing was alarming. It may have been dragging the castle back all yesterday. It had some of the strongest magic I've ever met. Whatever it was. All that was left of that last person you cleaned for, whatever was it? All that was left of the last person you cleaned for?" Sophie gave a weak little cackle of laughter. Her heart was behaving badly again. Hal realized something was wrong with her. He jumped indoors across his guitar, took hold of her elbow, and sat her in the chair. "Take it easy now." Something happened between Hal and Calcifer then. Sophie felt it, because she was being held by Hal, and Calcifer was still leaning out of the grate. Whatever it was, her heart began to behave properly almost at once. Hal looked at Calcifer, shrugged, and turned away to give Michael a whole lot of instructions about making Sophie keep quiet for the rest of the day. Then he picked up the guitar and left at last. Sophie lay in the chair and pretended to feel twice as ill as she did. She had to let Hal get out of sight. It was a nuisance he was going to upper folding as well, but she would walk so much more slowly that she would arrive around the time he started back. The important thing was not to meet him on the way. She watched Michael slyly while he spread out the spell and scratched his head over it. She waited until he dragged big leather books off the shelves and began making notes in a frantic, depressed sort of way. When he seemed properly absorbed, Sophie muttered several times, "Stuffy in here." Michael took no notice. "Terribly stuffy," Sophie said, getting up and shambling to the door. "Fresh air." She opened the door and climbed out. Calcifer obligingly stopped the castle dead while she did. Sophie landed in the heather and took a look round to get her bearings. The road over the hills to Upper Folding was a sandy line through the heather, just downhill from the castle. Naturally, Calcifer would not make things inconvenient for Hal. Sophie set off toward it. She felt a little sad. She was going to miss Michael and Calcifer. She was almost at the road when there was a shouting behind her. Michael came bounding down the hillside after her, and the tall black castle came bobbling along behind him, shedding anxious puffs of smoke from all four turrets. "What are you doing?" Michael said when he caught up. From the way he looked at her, Sophie could see he thought the Scarecrow had sent her wrong in the head. "I'm perfectly all right," Sophie said indignantly. "I'm simply going to see my other sister's granddaughter. She's called Letty Hatter, too. Now do you understand?" "Where does she live?" Michael demanded, as if he thought Sophie might not know. "Upper Folding," said Sophie. "But that's over 10 miles away," Michael said. "I promised Hal I'd make you rest. I can't let you go. I told him I wouldn't let you out of my sight." Sophie did not look very kindly on this. Hal thought she was useful now because he wanted her to see the king. Of course he did not want her to leave the castle. "Huh," she said. "Besides," said Michael, slowly grasping the situation, "Hal must have gone to Upper Folding too." "I'm quite sure he has," said Sophie. "Then you're anxious about this girl, if she's your great niece," Michael said, arriving at the point at last. "I see, but I can't let you go." "I'm going," said Sophie. "But if Hal sees you there, he'll be furious," Michael went on, working things out, "because I promised him he'll be mad with both of us. You ought to rest." Then, when Sophie was almost ready to hit him, he exclaimed, "Wait! There's a pair of 7-league boots in the broom cupboard." He took Sophie by her skinny old wrist and towed her uphill to the waiting castle. She was forced to give little hops in order not to catch her feet in the heather. "But," she panted, 7 leagues is 21 miles. I'd be halfway to Porthaven in 2 strides." "No, it's 10.5 miles a step." 10.5 miles a step," said Michael. "That makes Upper Folding almost exactly. If we each take 1 boot and go together, then I won't be letting you out of my sight, and you won't be doing anything strenuous, and we'll get there before Hal does, so he won't even know we've been. That solves all our problems beautifully." Michael was so pleased with himself that Sophie did not have the heart to protest. She shrugged and supposed Michael had better find out about the 2 Lettys before they changed looks again. It was more honest this way. But when Michael fetched the boots from the broom cupboard, Sophie began to have doubts. Up to now, she thought that there were 2 leather buckets that had somehow lost their handles and got a little squashed. That they were 2 leather buckets that had somehow lost their handles and then got a little squashed. "You're supposed to put your feet in them, shoe and all," Michael explained as he carried the 2 heavy bucket-shaped things to the door. "These are the prototypes of the boots. These are the prototypes of the boots that Hal made for the King's army. We managed to get the later ones a bit lighter and more boot-shaped." He and Sophie sat down on the doorstep and each put one foot in a boot. "Point yourself towards Upper Folding before you put the boot down," Michael warned her. He and Sophie stood up on the foot which was in an ordinary shoe and carefully swung themselves round to face Upper Folding. "Now tread," said Michael. Zip! The landscape instantly rushed past them so fast it was only a blur, a gray-green blur for the land and a blue-gray blur for the sea. The wind of their going tore at Sophie's hair and dragged every wrinkle in her face backward until she thought she would arrive with half her face behind each ear. The rushing stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Everything was calm and sunny. They were knee-deep in buttercups in the middle of Upper Folding Village Common. A cow nearby stared at them. Beyond it, thatched cottages drowsed under trees. Unfortunately, the bucket-like boot was so heavy that Sophie staggered as she landed. Don't put that foot down," Michael yelled, too late. There was another zipping blur and more rushing wind. When it stopped, Sophie found herself right down the Folding Valley, almost into Marsh Folding. "Oh, drat," she said, and hopped carefully around on her shoe and tried again. Zip! Blur! And she was back in Upper Folding Green again, staggering forward with the weight of the boot. She had a glimpse of Michael diving to catch her. Zip! Blur! "Oh, bother!" wailed Sophie. She was up in the hills again. The crooked black shape of the castle was drifting peacefully nearby. Calcifer was amusing himself, blowing black smoke rings from one turret. Sophie saw that much before her shoe caught in the heather and she stumbled forward again. Zip! Zip! This time Sophie visited in rapid succession the market square market shipping and the front lawn of a very grand mansion. "Blow!" she cried. "Drat!" 1 word for each place. And she was off again with her own momentum and another zip right down at the end of the valley that in a field somewhere. A large red bull raised its ringed nose from the grass and thoughtfully lowered its horns. "I'm just leaving, my good beast," Sophie cried, hopping herself round frantically. Zip! Back to the mansion. Zip! To Market Square. Zip! And there was the castle yet again. She was getting the hang of it. Zip! Here was Upper Folding. But how did you stop? Zip! Oh, confound it! Sophie cried, almost in marsh folding again. This time she hopped round very carefully and trod with great deliberation. Zip! Unfortunately, the boot landed in a cow pat, and she sat down with a thump. Ew. It landed in cow poop. Michael sprinted up before Sophie could move, and dragged the boot off of her foot. Thank you, Sophie cried breathlessly. There seemed no reason I should ever stop. Sophie's heart pounded a bit as they walked across to the common to Mrs. Fairfax's house, but only in the way hearts do when you have done a lot quickly. She felt very grateful for whatever Howl and Calcifer had done. Nice place, Michael remarked as he hid the boots in Mrs. Fairfax's hedge. Sophie agreed. The house was the biggest in the village. It was thatched with white walls between the black beams, and as Sophie remembered from visits as a child, you walked up to the porch through a garden crowded with flowers and humming with bees. That sounds terrible, actually. The flowers sound very nice, but the bees, though. Over the porch, a honeysuckle and a white climbing rose were competing as to which could give the most work to the bees. It was a perfect hot summer morning down here in Upper Folding. Mrs. Fairfax answered the door herself. She was one of those plump, comfortable ladies, with swaths of butter-colored hair coiled round her head, who made you feel good with life just to look at her. Sophie felt just the tiniest bit envious of Letty. Mrs. Fairfax looked from Sophie to Michael. She had seen Sophie last a year ago as a girl of 17, and there was no reason for her to recognize her as an old woman of 90. Good morning to you, she said politely. Sophie sighed. Michael said, This is Letty Hatter's great-aunt. I thought, I brought her here to see Letty. Oh, I thought the face looked familiar, Mrs. Fairfax exclaimed. There's quite a family likeness. Do come in. Letty's a little bit busy just now, but have some scones and honey while you wait. She opened her front door wider. Instantly, a large collie dog squeezed past Mrs. Fairfax's skirts, barged between Sophie and Michael, and ran across the nearest flower bed, snapping off flowers left and right. Oh, stop him! Mrs. Fairfax gasped, flying in pursuit. I don't want him out just now! There was a minute or so of helter-skelter chase in which the dog ran hither and thither, whining in a disturbed way, and Mrs. Fairfax and Sophie ran after the dog, jumping flower beds and getting in one another's way, and Michael ran after Sophie, crying, Stop! You'll make yourself ill! Then the dog set off loping around one corner of the house. Michael realized that the way to stop Sophie was to stop the dog. He made a crosswise dash through the flower beds, plunged around the house after the dog, and seized it by 2 handfuls of its thick coat just as it reached the orchard at the back. Sophie hobbled up to find Michael pulling the dog away backward and making such strange faces at her that she thought at first he was ill. But he jerked his head so often toward the orchard that she realized he was only trying to tell her something. She stuck her face round the corner of the house, expecting to see a swarm of bees. Howl was there with Letty. They were in a grove of mossy apple trees in full bloom, with a row of beehives in the distance. Letty sat in a white garden seat. Howl was kneeling on one knee in the grass at her feet, holding one of her hands and looking noble and ardent. Letty was smiling lovingly at him. But the worst of it, as far as Sophie was concerned, was that Letty did not look like Martha at all. She was her own extremely beautiful self. She was wearing a dress of the same kind of pinks and whites as the crowded apple blossom overhead. Her dark hair trailed in glossy curls over one shoulder, and her eyes shone with devotion for Howl. Sophie brought her head back round the corner and looked with dismay at Michael, holding the whining collie dog. He must have had a speed spell with him, Michael whispered, equally dismayed. Mrs. Fairfax caught them up, panting and trying to pin back a loose coil of her buttery hair. Bad dog, she said in a fierce whisper to the collie. I'll put a spell on you if you do that once more. Oh, right, I forgot that she was a witch. Yeah, Sophie is crazy, and yes, you can't tell her what to do. The dog blinked and crouched down. Mrs. Fairfax pointed a stern finger. Into the house! Stay in the house! The collie shook himself free of Michael's hands and slunk away around the house again. Thank you so much, Mrs. Fairfax said to Michael as they all followed it. He will keep trying to bite Letty's visitor. Inside! She shouted sternly in the front garden as the collie seemed to be thinking of going round the house and getting to the orchard the other way. The dog gave her a woeful look over its shoulder and crawled dismally indoors through the porch. That dog may have the right idea, Sophie said. Mrs. Fairfax, do you know who Letty's visitor is? Mrs. Fairfax chuckled. The Wizard Pendragon, or Howl, or whatever he calls himself, she said. But Letty and I don't let on we know. It amused me when he first turned up, calling himself Sylvester Oak, because I could see he'd forgotten me, though I hadn't forgotten him, even though his hair used to be black in his student days. Mrs. Fairfax by now had her hands folded in front of her, and was standing bolt upright, prepared to talk all day, as Sophie had often seen her do before. He was my old tutor's very last pupil, you know, before she retired. When Mr. Fairfax was alive, he used to like me to transport us both to Kingsbury to see his show from time to time. I can imagine two very nicely if I take it slowly, and I always used to drop in on old Mrs. Penstiman while I was there. She likes her old pupils to keep in touch, and one time she introduced this young Howl to us. Oh, she was proud of him. She taught Wizard Suleiman too, you know, and she said Howl was twice as good. But don't you know the reputation Howl has? Michael interrupted. Getting into Mrs. Fairfax's conversation was rather like getting into a turning, skipping rope. You had to choose the exact moment, but once you were in, you were in. Mrs. Fairfax turned herself slightly to face Michael. I like that description, by the way. Most of it's just talk, to my mind, she said. Michael opened his mouth to say that it was not, but he was in the skipping rope then, and it went on turning. And I said to Letty, "Here's your big chance, my love." I knew Hal could teach her 20 times more than I could, for, I don't mind telling you, Letty's brains go way beyond mine, and she could end up in the same league as the Witch of the Waste, only in a good way. Letty's a good girl, and I'm fond of her. If Mrs. Penstiman was still teaching, I'd have Letty to her tomorrow. But she isn't. So I said, Letty, here's Wizard Howl courting you, and you could do worse than fall in love with him yourself and let him be your teacher. The pair of you will go far. I don't think Letty was too keen on the idea at first, but she's been softening lately, and today it seems to be going beautifully. Here Mrs. Fairfax paused to beam benevolently at Michael, and Sophie dashed into skipping rope for her turn. But someone told me Letty was fond of someone else, she said. Sorry for him, you mean? Oh, sorry for him, you mean? said Mrs. Fairfax. She lowered her voice. There's a terrible disability there, she whispered suggestively. And it's asking too much of any girl. I told him so. I'm sorry for him myself. What is going on? Sophie managed a mystified "Oh?" But it's a fearsomely strong spell. It's very sad, Mrs. Fairfax wound on. I had to tell him that there's no way someone of my abilities can break anything that's put on them by the Witch of the Waste. Hal might, but of course he can't ask Hal, can he? Here Michael, who kept looking nervously to the corner of the house in case Hal came round it and discovered them, managed to trample through the skipping rope and stop it by saying, I think we'd better be going. Are you sure you won't come in for a taste of my honey? Said Mrs. Fairfax. I use it in nearly all my spells, you know. And she was off again, this time about the magical properties of honey. Michael and Sophie walked purposefully down the path to the gate, and Mrs. Fairfax drifted behind them, talking away and sorrowfully straightening plants that the dog had bent as she talked. Sophie, meanwhile, racked her brains for a way to find out how Mrs. Fairfax knew Letty was Letty without upsetting Michael. Mrs. Fairfax paused to gasp a bit as she heaved a large lupine upright. Right, because it keeps getting even more confusing. It's actually Letty. And Michael has talked to Martha, who currently looks like Letty, and found out that Hal doesn't know her, or she doesn't know Hal, so he was relieved. But now he sees Letty because Letty looks like herself. So he's probably very confused. Just like the description of what's going on in this story. Where am I? Okay. Sophie took the plunge. Mrs. Fairfax, wasn't it my niece Martha who was supposed to come to you? Naughty girls, Mrs. Fairfax said, smiling and shaking her head as she emerged from the lupine. As if I wouldn't recognize one of my own honey-based spells. But as I said to her at the time, I'm not one to keep anyone against their will, and I'd always rather teach someone who wants to learn. Only, I said to her, I'll have no pretense here. You stay as your own self or not at all. And it's worked out very happily, as you see. Are you sure you won't stay and ask her for yourself? I think we'd better go, Sophie said. We have to get back, Michael added with another nervous look toward the orchard. He collected the 7-league boots from the hedge and set one down outside the gate for Sophie. And I'm going to hold on to you this time, he said. Mrs. Fairfax leaned over the gate while Sophie inserted her foot in the boot. 7-leaguers, she said. Would you believe I've not seen any of those for years? Very useful things for someone your age, I wouldn't mind a pair myself these days, so it's Mrs. I guess, like, Mrs. I guess that's, like, just a placeholder if you don't know the person's name. Yeah. Mrs. I wouldn't mind a pair for myself these days, so it's you Letty inherits her witchcraft from, is it? Not that it necessarily runs in families. But, as often as not, Michael took hold of Sophie's arm and pulled. Both boots came down, and the rest of Mrs. Fairfax's talk vanished in the zip and rush of air. Next moment, Michael had to brace his feet in order to not collide with the castle. The door was open. Inside, Calcifer was roaring, "Port Haven door! Someone's been banging on it ever since you left." And we have Chapter 9, which is in which Michael has trouble with a spell. But also, yes, it's getting very complicated, isn't it? It was the sea captain at the door, come for his wind spell at last, and not at all pleased at having to wait. "If I miss my tide, boy," he said to Michael, "I shall have a word with the sorcerer about you. I don't like lazy boys." Before I continue, I'm actually just going to take a drink of water. Hold on. This is a reminder for everybody to drink some water. I've been forgetting to remind people lately. I hope you've been drinking in the meantime. Like, from the last time I told you, which probably was, like, videos and videos and videos ago. I would assume that you have been. You should. How dare you? That's against the stream rules. Am I going to have to ban my own moderator? Okay. Let me go ahead and get back to the story. Oh, I see there are 20 notifications here about dropped frames and stuff. Wow, okay. Skipped frames detected. 70% over the last 2 minutes. No, I don't think it's just you. I'm really sad about that. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why this only happens when I'm... I don't know what to do about it. Do you have any, like, recommendations? Maybe I'll turn off my video capture for a second and see what happens. Just have, like, a blank screen here. Now there is nothing. I mean, what I'd like to do is I'd like to try and, do, like, a... I'll try to figure it out. Make, like, a screen for, like, when I turn off my camera, so this way... I'm still here. I told you I'm turning off my video capture for a second. To try and calm things down, but I don't know that that's gonna work. I'm here. But yeah, I'm gonna try to make that. I'll try to do it like today or something. Okay, let me put the, what's it called? I'll put the camera back on, but I'm not sure it'll be any better. Let's see. I hope that the lag doesn't come back, but I'm worried about it. Is it still all laggy? Or is it, like, better now? I don't know what to do. You know, the only thing I can do is, like, stop the stream. That's the only thing I can think of. Well, I'm glad that my audio has been fine at least, but still. I'm not exactly sure how. Let me see. Properties? Okay. So, the preset for the, what's it called? The preset here is 1280 by 720. So I could change it. Should I try 960 by 540? I'm gonna continue. I just want to figure out if I can make this a little better. Okay. Let's try it. Oh, it just changed the size. It looks like. I don't know if that actually did anything. It changed the size, right? It's a little smoother. Should I leave it like this? It's kind of weird, right? Isn't it? Hey, I mean, if that works better, I can leave it like this. Okay. Alright, fine, I'll leave it like this then. If that's better. Yeah. Oh, I see it's back to being skipped frames detected 65% over the last 2 minutes. Just let me know how it goes. We'll keep it like this, but if it's a problem, you know, just check with me. Just mention something. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Michael, in Sophie's opinion, was far too polite to him, but she was feeling too dejected to interfere. When the captain had gone, Michael went to the bench to frown over his spell again, and Sophie sat silently mending her stockings. She'd only the one pair, and her knobby feet had worn huge holes in them. Her gray dress by this time was frayed and dirty. She wondered whether she dared cut the least stained bits out of Hal's ruined blue and silver suit to make herself a new skirt with, but she did not quite dare. Sophie, Michael said, looking up from his 11th page of notes, how many nieces have you? Sophie had been afraid Michael would start asking questions. When you get to my age, my lad, she said, you lose count. They all look so alike. Those two leddies could be twins, to my mind. Oh, no, not really, Michael said to her surprise. The niece in upper folding isn't as pretty as my Letty. He tore up the 11th page. That's interesting because she is kind of a mixture of Martha and Letty right now, isn't she? So, He tore up the 11th page and made a 12th. I'm glad Hal didn't meet my Letty, he said. He began on his 13th page and tore that up too. I wanted to laugh when that Mrs. Fairfax said she knew who Hal was, didn't you? No, said Sophie. It had made no difference to Letty's feelings. She thought of Letty's bright, adoring face under the apple blossom. I suppose there's no chance, she said hopelessly, that Hal could be properly in love this time. I suppose there's no chance, she said hopelessly, that Hal could be properly in love this time. Calcifer snorted green sparks up the chimney. I was afraid you'd start thinking that, Michael said, but you'd be deceiving yourself, just like Mrs. Fairfax. How do you know? Said Mrs. Sophie? Said Sophie. Calcifer and Michael exchanged glances. Did he forget to spend at least an hour in the bathroom this morning? Michael asked. He was in there 2 hours, said Calcifer, putting spells on his face. Vain fool. There you are then, said Michael. The day Hal forgets to do that will be the day I believe he's really in love, and not before. Sophie thought of Hal on one knee in the orchard, posing to look as handsome as possible, and she knew they were right. She thought of going to the bathroom and tipping all Hal's beauty spells down the toilet, but she did not quite dare. Instead, she hobbled up and fetched the blue and silver suit, which she had spent the rest of the day cutting little blue triangles out of in order to make a patchwork sort of skirt. Michael patted her shoulder kindly as he came to throw all 17 pages of his notes onto Calcifer. Everyone gets over things in the end, you know, he said. By this time it was clear Michael was having trouble with his spell. He gave up the notes and scraped some soot off the chimney. Calcifer craned round to watch him in a mystified way. Michael took a withered root from one of the bags hanging on the beams and put it in the soot. Then, after much thought, he turned the doorknob blew down, and vanished for 20 minutes into Porthaven. He came back with a large whorled seashell, and put that with the root in the soot. After that, he tore up pages and pages of paper and put those in too. He put the lot in front of the human skull and stood blowing on it so that the soot and bits of paper whirled all over the bench. What's he doing? Do you think? Calcifer asked Sophie. Michael gave up blowing and started mashing everything, paper and all, with a pestle and mortar, looking at the skull expectantly from time to time. Nothing happened, so he tried different ingredients from bags and jars. I feel bad about spying on Hal, he announced as he pounded a third set of ingredients to death in a bowl. He may be fickle to females, but he's been awfully good to me. He took me in when I was just an unwanted orphan sitting on the doorstep in Porthaven. How did that come about? Asked Sophie as she snipped out another blue triangle. My mother died and my father got drowned in a storm, Michael said. And nobody wants you when that happens. I had to leave our house because I couldn't pay rent, and I tried to live in the streets, but people kept turning me off doorsteps and out of boats until the only place I could think of to go was somewhere everyone was too scared to intervene with. Hal had just started up in a small way as Sorcerer Jenkins then. But everyone said his house had devils in it, so I slept on his doorstep for a couple of nights until Hal opened the door one morning on his way to buy bread, and I fell inside. So he said I could wait indoors while he got something to eat. I went in, and there was Calcifer, and I started talking to him because I'd never met a demon before. What did you talk about? Said Sophie, wondering if Calcifer had asked Michael to break his contract too. He told me his troubles and dripped on me. Didn't you? He told me his troubles and dripped on me. Didn't you? Said Calcifer. It didn't seem to occur to him that I might have troubles as well. I don't think you have. You just grumble a lot, Michael said. You were quite nice to me that morning, and I think Hal was impressed, but you know how he is. He didn't tell me I could stay. He just didn't tell me to go, so I started being useful wherever I could, looking after money, so that he didn't spend it all as soon as he got it, and so on. The spell gave a sort of whiff, then exploded mildly, which is the opposite word. Michael brushed soot off the skull, sighing, and tried new ingredients. Sophie began making a patchwork of blue triangles round her feet on the floor. I did make lots of stupid mistakes when I first started, Michael went on. Hal was awfully nice about it. I thought I got over that by now. And I thought I got over that now. And I think I do help with money. Hal buys such expensive clothes. He says no one's going to employ a wizard who looks as if he can't make money at the trade. That's just because he likes clothes, said Calcifer. His orange eyes watched Sophie at work rather meaningly. This suit was spoiled. Sophie said. It isn't just clothes, Michael said. Remember last winter when we were down to your last log and Hal went off and bought the skull and that stupid guitar? I was really annoyed with him. He said they looked good. What did you do about logs? Sophie asked. Hal conjured some from someone who owed him money, Michael said. At least, he said they did, and I just hoped he was telling the truth. And we ate seaweed. Hal says it's good for you. Nice stuff, murmured Calcifer, dry and crackly. I hate it, said Michael, staring abstractedly at his bowl of pounded stuff. I don't know. There should be 7 ingredients, unless it's 7 processes, but let's try it in a pentacle anyway. He put the bowl on the floor and chalked a sort of 5-pointed star around it. The powder exploded with a force that blew Sophie's triangles into the hearth. Michael swore and hurriedly rubbed out the chalk marks. Sophie, he said, I'm stuck in this spell. You don't think you could possibly help me, do you? Just like someone bringing their homework to their granny, Sophie thought, collecting triangles and patiently laying them out again. Let's have a look, she said cautiously. I don't know anything about magic, you know. Michael eagerly thrust a strange, slightly shiny paper into her hand. It looked unusual, even for a spell. It was printed in bold letters, but they were slightly gray and blurred. And there were gray blurs. Hold on. But they were slightly gray and blurred, and there were gray blurs, like retreating storm clouds, all around the edges. See what you think, said Michael. Sophie read, Go and catch a falling star. Get with child and mandrake root. Tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear the mermaid singing, or to keep off envy stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. Decide what this is about. Write a second verse yourself. It puzzled Sophie exceedingly. It was not quite like any of the spells she had snooped at before. She plowed through it twice, not really helped by Michael eagerly explaining as she tried to read. You know, Hal told me that advanced spells have a puzzle in them? Well, I decided at first that every line was meant to be a puzzle. I used soot with sparks in it for the falling star, and a seashell for the mermaid singing, and I thought I might count as a child, so I got mandrake root down, and I wrote out lists of past years for the almanacs, but I wasn't sure about that. Maybe that's where I went wrong. And could the thing that stops stinging be dockleaf? I hadn't thought of that before. Anyway, none of it works. I'm not surprised, said Sophie. It looks to me like a set of impossible things to do. But Michael was not having that. If the things were impossible, he pointed out reasonably, no one would ever be able to do the spell. And, he added, I'm so ashamed of spying on Hal that I want to make up for it by getting the spell right. Very well, said Sophie. Let's start with decide what this is about. That ought to start things moving, if deciding is part of the spell anyway. But Michael was not having that either. No, he said, it's the sort of spell that reveals itself as you do it. That's what the last line means. When you write the second half, saying what the spell means, that makes it work. Those kind are very advanced. We have to crack the first bit first. Sophie collected her blue triangles into a pile again. Let's ask Calcifer, she suggested. Calcifer, who... But this was yet another thing Michael did not let her do. No, be quiet. I think Calcifer's part of the spell. Look at the way it says, tell me and teach me. I thought at first it meant to teach the skull, but that didn't work. So it must be Calcifer. You can do it by yourself if you sit on everything I have to say, Sophie said. Anyway, surely Calcifer must know who cleft his own foot. Calcifer flared up a little at this. I haven't got any feet. I'm a demon, not a devil. Saying which, he retreated right under his logs, where he could be heard clinking about, muttering, a lot of nonsense. All the rest of the time, Sophie and Michael were discussing the spell. By this time, the puzzle had got a grip on Sophie. She packed away her blue triangles, fetched pen and paper, and started making notes in the same sort of quantities that Michael had. For the rest of the day, she and Michael sat staring into the distance, nibbling quills and throwing out suggestions to one another. An average page of Sophie's notes read, Does garlic keep off envy? I could cut a star out of paper and drop it. Could we tell it to Hal? Hal would like mermaids better than Calcifer. Do you not think Hal's mind honest? Is Calcifer's? Where are past years anyway? Does it mean one of those dry roots must bear fruit? Plant it? Next to dockleaf? In a seashell? Cloven hoof, most things but horse. Shoe a horse with a clove of garlic? Wind? Smell? Wind of 7-league boots? Is Howl devil? Cloven toes and 7-league boots? Mermaid in boots? Let me just take some more water. I wonder if it's, because it's kind of, like, cloudy here, if I'm getting a bit nasal and getting some, sometimes my throat gets scratchy at those times. Okay. As Sophie wrote this, Michael asked, equally desperately, could the wind be some sort of pulley? An honest man being hanged? That's black magic, though. Let's have supper, said Sophie. They ate bread and cheese, still staring into the distance. At last, Sophie said, Michael, for goodness sake, let's give up guessing and try doing just what it says. Where's the best place to catch a shooting star? Out on the hills? Porthaven marches are flatter. Michael said, can we? Shooting stars go awfully fast. So can we in 7-league boots, Sophie pointed out. Michael sprang up, full of relief and delight. I think you've got it, he said, scrambling for the boots. Let's go and try. This time, Sophie prudently took her stick and her shawl, since it was now quite dark. Michael was turning the doorknob blue down when two strange things happened. On the bench, the teeth of the skull started clattering, and a Calcifer blazed right up in the chimney. I don't want you to go, he said. We'll be back soon, Michael said soothingly. They went out into into the street in Porthaven. It was a bright, balmy night. As soon as they had reached the end of the street, however, Michael remembered that Sophie had been ill that morning and began worrying about the effect of the night air on her health. I'm wondering why poor Calcifer didn't want them to go. Yeah, I've been reading for a little while. I wanted to finish off this chapter, and then we'll stop for the day, and we can discuss. But yeah, I'm wondering about that, because that was weird. Calcifer's not usually that worried. Also, I see more notifications about the frame rate. Are we okay, or do you want me to change things again? Is it alright? If things are alright, I'll keep going. No perfect, but okay. Alright. Well, I'll continue for now. We're almost done with the reading portion. Oh god, I can never tell what side with the reading portion, at least. Okay. Sophie had told him not to be silly. She stumped gamely along with her stick until they left the lighted windows behind, and the night became wide and damp and chilly. The marshes smelled of salt and earth. The sea glittered and softly swished to the rear. Sophie could feel, more than see, the miles and miles of flatness stretching away in front of them. What she could see were brands of low bluish mist and pale glimmers of marshy pools over and over again until they built into a pale line where the sky started. The sky was everywhere else, huger still. The Milky Way looked like a band of mist risen from the marshes, and the keen stars twinkled through it. Michael and Sophie stood, each with a boot ready on the ground in front of them, waiting for one of the stars to move. After about an hour, Sophie had to pretend she was not shivering for fear of worrying Michael. Half an hour later, Michael said, May is not the right time of year. August or November is best. Half an hour after that, he said in a worried way, What do we do about the mandrake root? Let's see to this part before we worry about that, Sophie said, biting her teeth together while she spoke for fear they would chatter. Sometime later, Michael said, You go home, Sophie. It's my spell, after all. Sophie had her mouth open to say that this was a very good idea when one of the stars came unstuck from the firmament, and darted in a white streak down the sky. There's one! Sophie shrieked instead. Michael thumped his foot into the boot, and was off. Sophie braced herself with her stick and was off a second later. Zip! Squash! Down far out in the marshes with mist and emptiness and dull glimmering pools in all directions. Sophie stabbed her stick into the ground and managed to stand still. Michael's boot was a dark blot standing just beside her. Michael himself was a splooshy sound of madly running feet somewhere else. And there was the falling star. Sophie could see it, a little white descending flame shape a few yards beyond the dark movements that were Michael. The bright shape was coming down slowly now, and it looked as if Michael might catch it. Sophie dragged her shoe out of the boot. "Come on, stick," she crowed. "Get me there!" And she set off at top hobble, leaping across tussocks and staggering through pools, with her eyes on that little white light. By the time she caught up, Michael was stalking the star with soft steps, both arms out to catch it. Sophie could see him outlined against the star's light. The star was drifting level with Michael's hands, and only a step or so beyond. It was looking back at him nervously. How odd, Sophie thought. It was made of light. It lit up a white ring of grass and reeds and black pools around Michael, and yet it had big, anxious eyes peering backward at Michael, and a small, pointed face. Sophie's arrival frightened it. It gave an erratic swoop and cried out in a shrill, crackling voice, "What is it? What do you want?" Sophie tried to say to Michael, "Do stop, it's terrified," but she had no breath left to speak with. "I only want to catch you," Michael explained. "I won't hurt you." "No, no," the star crackled desperately. "That's wrong. I'm supposed to die." "But I could save you if you let me catch you." Michael held it gently. "No," cried the star. "I'd rather die." It dived away from Michael's fingers. Michael plunged for it, but it was too quick for him. It swooped for the nearest marsh pool, and the black water leaped into a blaze of whiteness for just an instant. Then there was a small dying sizzle. When Sophie hobbled over, Michael was standing watching the last light fade out of a little round lump under the dark water. "That was sad," Sophie said. Michael sighed. "Yes, my heart sort of went out to it. Let's go home. I'm sick of this spell." It took them 20 minutes to find the boots. Sophie thought it was a miracle they found them at all. "You know," Michael said as they trudged dejectedly through the dark streets of Port Haven, "I can tell I'll never be able to do this spell. It's too advanced for me. I shall have to ask Hal. I hate giving in, but at least I'll get some sense out of Hal now that this Letty Hatter's given in to him." This did not cheer Sophie up at all. Okay, and then chapter 10 will be in which Calcifer promises Sophie a hint. But that'll be it for today, and it looks like we're about halfway through the book now. Cool, huh? What are your thoughts? Let's talk. Mm-mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-mm. The poor shooting star. It reminded me, the fact that it's sentient reminded me of, Stardust, which is another book by Neil Gaiman, not this author. But we probably won't be reading it here because I've already read it, but it's a book I really enjoy. And there's a sentient star in there, so. Not quite as sad, though. Well, I guess that's just what shooting stars do, though. They fall. Yeah, I do too. I don't know that it has to do with the skull, but, I don't know that she actually did do something to the skull. I'm not sure. But I do think that she has power. She has power with clothes, because Hal mentioned that, for the gray and scarlet suit, that she, gave it new life, or, made it look better than it did before. I actually don't remember that from the movie. So, I'm wondering if that's something that got cut. Like I said, for the movie, the visuals are really good, and, you can see exactly what I'm reading. You can picture all of that with, you can picture all of that. You're seeing it. But what I mean is that the visuals are really accurate to what you read in the book, mostly. But for the story, I think the story kind of, is less in there just a little bit. He wasn't, though. I don't know that he was shocked by the teeth chattering, because he mentioned something else directly after that he was, like, shocked about or thinking about. So he might have just been thinking of that. So, we don't know for now. Stardust, the movie is lovely. The book is really, really good too. If we got the chance, I'd love to share that book here. I like a lot of Neil Gaiman's writing. Stardust is amazing. Coraline is amazing. All stuff that was, like, adapted into movie form. And the movies are actually really good. Like, those movies are ones that they're kind of like rare gems in that usually movie adaptations of books aren't that great. Or they're kind of mixed bag. I really like the adaptations of the Neil Gaiman movies. But they are different from the books. There's just more to them, I feel like. And then Coraline is actually, like, creepier than, like, the book, which was actually made for kids, is actually creepier, I think, than the movie. Yeah, I mean, maybe we will go over Stardust at some point. Next time we do have a Neil Gaiman book, we have the Graveyard Book, but which will be new for all of us because I haven't read the Graveyard Book either. Yeah, no, I recommend the book as well. The book is really good for Coraline. The movie, like I said, the movie's really good too. The Neil Gaiman adaptations are all pretty good. But the book is pretty creepy and fun. It's hard. That's the whole point of us doing this club here, is to read more books. Because it's hard to find the time, and it's hard to, like... It's hard to find the time, and then it's hard to set aside that time when you have it to be reading, because something's always telling you, like, this isn't what you should be using your time for. So, that's what this is. You know? That's the whole point of this. It's a fun, creepy book. Is there anything more to discuss for Howl's Moving Castle for today? Anything else you guys want to talk about? Like the Lady Martha thing, or the... or the King. The 7 League Boots are interesting. The 7 League Boots actually remind me of the Babylon Candle from Stardust. Alright then, well, then I think that's where we'll be leaving things off today. So, we have about half the book, or a little more than half the book left. I'm really excited. I'm really enjoying this book so far. I'm gonna be sad when it's over. But we will be back next week to continue it. So, on Saturday, of course, we'll have Hatoful Boyfriend, Holiday Star, which we'll probably be finishing off around, on Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we have our Quoth the Author Howl's Moving Castle for Sunday for 5 p.m. And you can go ahead and go to YouTube to watch replays of previous episodes. It's just YouTube and the same username there. I also have a reaction to a new, the newest J-Hope video, music video, Arson, up there as well, which I was very excited about. So please go and support that. Go ahead and subscribe to me on there. Go ahead, comment, like, and subscribe. Comment, like, you know, come talk to me. Let's have fun. There's an analysis in my reaction video too, so you'll get some of that. And yeah, I'm also on TikTok. Yeah, that's true. And yeah, so that is it for today. I will see you guys next time. And for now, this has been Sky.